You know, it's really your life. You go to this white high school where you're one of the only black kids, and of course, hijinks ensue. You get into all these wacky predicaments.
I went to school with the kids from Jersey Shore, pretty much. That's
right.
Like that kind of white person.
Chris Rock has spent over 4 decades making the world laugh. But behind the jokes, the standing ovations, and the fame is a story that's far from funny. From growing up in poverty and facing relentless racism to navigating heartbreak, public humiliation, and deep personal loss, Chris Rock's journey has been filled with pain that few truly understand. For years, he used humor as armor, hiding his struggles behind the sharpest wit in comedy. But at 60, after everything he's been through, fans are beginning to see a different side of him. A man who's been broken, rebuilt, and scarred by a world that hasn't always been kind. So today, we're diving into the untold story, the pain, the betrayal, and the redemption. Behind the man who made laughter his greatest weapon. Because the tragedy of Chris Rock is that the funniest man alive has lived one of the saddest lives imaginable. From pain to punchlines. Long before the fame, the awards, and the world tours, Chris Rock was just a skinny kid from Brooklyn, trying to survive. He was born in 1965 into a working-class family, one of 8 siblings, in a time and place where opportunity wasn't handed out easily, especially for a young black man. His father, Julius, worked multiple jobs to support the family. His mother, Rosalie, was a teacher and social worker. They did everything they could to provide. But the Rock family lived in a world where the color of your skin could still dictate your future. When Chris was a teenager, his parents enrolled him in a school in a predominantly white neighborhood, hoping it would give him a better education. But instead of opportunity, he found something darker: daily racism, bullying, and humiliation. He was beaten up, spit on, called names he still refuses to repeat. He once said that every day he would walk into school knowing exactly who was going to attack him and how bad it would be. Those experiences shaped him and nearly broke him. But somehow, out of all that pain, came his purpose. Because comedy became his escape, his revenge, his weapon. The same world that made him feel invisible gave him the fire to speak out. Through laughter. But even as Chris found his voice, the demons from his past never truly left him. And soon, fame would bring a whole new kind of pain. The road to fame and the price of success. Chris Rock's journey to stardom wasn't overnight. It was a battle. He started performing stand-up in small New York clubs in the early 1980s. At first, no one laughed. But Chris kept showing up, night after night, sharpening his jokes, developing his style, and learning how to turn pain into power. Then, everything changed when Eddie Murphy discovered him. Murphy saw something raw and real, and took Chris under his wing, casting him in Beverly Hills Cop 2 and giving him the push he needed. From there, Saturday Night Live came calling, and Chris Rock became part of one of the most legendary comedy casts in TV history. But even there, he faced a painful reality. He wasn't being used to his full potential. While other cast members flourished, Chris often felt sidelined, his material cut or ignored. He later described those years as humbling and frustrating. Still, he refused to quit. When he released his 1996 HBO special Bring the Pain, everything changed. It was raw, it was fearless, and it made him a superstar. Chris Rock became more than a comedian. He became a cultural voice. But fame didn't erase the wounds that made him. Because behind the laughter, he was still that bullied kid from Brooklyn, trying to prove his worth to a world that never gave him a break. And as his career exploded, his personal life began to crumble. Love, marriage, and betrayal. In 1996, the same year he reached the peak of his comedy career, Chris married Malik Compton, a public relations executive and philanthropist. For years, they seemed like the perfect couple. They had 2 daughters, and from the outside, it looked like Chris had it all: fame, family, and success. But behind closed doors, things weren't so perfect. Chris later admitted to being unfaithful during the marriage, not once, but multiple times. He blamed the temptations of fame, the road, and his own immaturity. In 2016, after nearly 20 years of marriage, the two divorced, a process Chris described as the most painful experience of his life. He said it forced him to face his own flaws, his ego, and the lies he told himself for years. For the first time, he was alone. And for someone who spent decades surrounded by applause, silence was unbearable. The divorce left him heartbroken, but it also forced him to grow, to look in the mirror and confront the man behind the mask. But just as he was beginning to rebuild his life, another tragedy would remind him how fragile everything truly was. Losing his father and the shadow of grief. Before fame, before success, before the spotlight, there was one man who shaped everything about Chris Rock's worldview: his father, Julius. Julius Rock was strict but loving, hard but fair. He was the embodiment of discipline and sacrifice, working as a truck driver and newspaper delivery man just to put food on the table. When Chris was 23, Julius suddenly passed away after ulcer surgery. The loss was devastating. Chris has said that it was the single most defining moment of his life, the day he truly became a man. He carried his father's lessons everywhere, especially the idea that no matter how hard life gets, you show up, you work hard, and you don't make excuses. But deep down, the loss created a wound that never fully healed. In interviews, Chris has said that part of his drive, his relentless work ethic and perfectionism, came from trying to fill that void, to make his father proud even long after he was gone. But as he later learned, no amount of fame could ever bring that peace back. The slap heard around the world. For most people, Chris Rock's name will forever be linked to one shocking moment: the 2022 Oscars. That night, what was supposed to be a celebration of cinema turned into one of the most infamous live television moments in history. As Chris stood on stage presenting, he made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith. Seconds later, Will Smith walked up and slapped him in front of millions of viewers. The room went silent. Chris stood there, stunned, humiliated, trying to keep his composure as the world watched. He later admitted that the incident left him traumatized, not just because of the physical act, but because of what it represented: the betrayal, the loss of dignity, and the way people laughed before realizing the pain behind it. For a man who built his life around making people laugh, that moment broke something deep inside him. He didn't lash out. He didn't fight back. He did what he's always done. He turned pain into comedy. But even in his Netflix special, Selective Outrage, you could hear it in his voice: the anger, the sadness, the exhaustion. That slap wasn't just a headline. It was the culmination of decades of struggle, humiliation, and endurance that Chris had carried his entire life. And for the first time, the world saw him not as a comedian, but as a man. The private pain few see. Beyond the spotlight, Chris Rock's life has been marked by emotional battles that few people talk about. He's been open about his diagnosis of nonverbal learning disorder, a neurological condition that makes it difficult to understand social cues and relationships. He's also revealed that he spent years in therapy, facing childhood trauma and the lasting effects of racism and bullying. For Chris, comedy was always therapy, but real healing came only when he stopped running from himself. He's admitted that therapy changed his life, helping him confront not only his past, but his patterns, the need for approval, the self-destructive habits, and the emotional walls that fame built around him. Today, Chris Rock is still standing, but it's clear that the man behind the jokes carries more scars than most will ever know. The redemption of Chris Rock. At 60, Chris Rock has reached a new chapter, one not defined by pain, but by perspective. He's still performing, still writing, still doing what he does best, turning truth into laughter. But now his comedy feels different. More raw, more reflective, more human. He's not just making jokes anymore. He's telling stories about survival, forgiveness, and learning to let go. In his own words, the hardest thing in life is to heal when you're still living. Chris has begun rebuilding his relationship with himself, with his family, and with his past. He's mentoring young comedians, focusing on his daughters, and finally allowing himself to slow down. It's not about the fame anymore. It's about peace. Because after everything, the pain, the loss, the betrayal, Chris Rock has learned that laughter doesn't erase tragedy, but it can help you live with it. Legacy, forgiveness, and the search for peace. When you reach 60 years old, after decades in the spotlight, countless controversies, and a lifetime of laughter, what's left to prove? For Chris Rock, the answer is simple: nothing. He's done chasing applause. He's done explaining himself. And, perhaps most importantly, he's done pretending that laughter alone can heal every wound. Over the last few years, Chris has begun embracing something new: forgiveness, not just for others, but for himself. The slap at the Oscars, the divorce, the childhood trauma, the mistakes, all of it could have hardened him. But instead, it humbled him. He's spoken about learning how to stop reliving his pain and start releasing it. Because for a man who spent his entire life turning darkness into comedy, the hardest thing to learn was that not everything needs a punchline. In recent interviews, Chris has reflected on fatherhood, on how raising two daughters has taught him patience and empathy he never knew he had. He's admitted that being vulnerable doesn't make him weak. It makes him real. And maybe that's why so many fans are connecting with him now more than ever. The world isn't laughing at Chris Rock anymore. It's feeling with him. He's evolved from the sharp-tongued comic who skewered pop culture into something much deeper. A storyteller, philosopher, and truth-teller who's unafraid to show the cracks in his armor. Because through those cracks, the light gets in. Chris has hinted that he's thinking more about legacy these days, not just as a comedian, but as a man. What he'll leave behind isn't just jokes, specials, or movies, it's lessons. Lessons about pain, about survival, about turning struggle into strength. He's quietly funding education programs, mentoring new comedians, and giving opportunities to people who remind him of that young kid from Brooklyn, lost, underestimated, and just looking for a chance. And while the headlines often focus on the scandals, the truth is that Chris Rock has already left a mark that no controversy could erase. Because he's not just part of comedy history, he is comedy history. Still, as he steps into this next chapter of his life, one question remains. Can a man who spent his entire life making others happy finally learn to find happiness for himself? Chris Rock's story isn't just about comedy. It's about endurance. It's about a man who spent his entire life turning pain into power, who faced racism, heartbreak, and humiliation, and somehow came out stronger. He made the world laugh while carrying the weight of his own heartbreak. And that's what makes his story so deeply human. At 60, he's not the same man who first stepped onto the stage in a smoky New York club. He's wiser, softer, and, in his own words, finally at peace with who he is. Because behind the jokes, behind the fame, behind the laughter, is a survivor. And maybe that's the real legacy of Chris Rock. Not the laughs, not the fame, but the strength to keep going when the world gives you every reason to stop. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful deep dives into the untold truths of the people who shaped our world. Because sometimes, even the funniest people have the saddest stories. And the courage to tell them is what truly makes them legendary.